Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of our podcast here at AI and Faith. My name is Gilad Berenstein, and I'm a very proud founding member of this incredible organization. And I'm thrilled to be joined by two of our experts today to talk about artificial intelligence, the way it impacts foreign policy and international politics, and of course, the way people of faith think about AI in our own lives and our own faiths. But to start us off, I'm going to introduce each of our guests and ask them to introduce themselves. So first, Mark, let's start with you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Mark Chinen, and I teach at Seattle University School of Law. And I've been interested in primarily the governance of artificial intelligence, starting about 12 to 15 years ago. Written a book in the area, and I'm just keenly interested in the way in which, say, law and other forms of regulation can either guide the development or hinder it. And also, of course, the other things that are raised by our artificial intelligence and its intersection with the law.
Absolutely. And Sreevas, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, all. It's great to meet with all of you in the AA and Faith podcast audience. I'm Sreevas. I am a professor in international business and entrepreneurship. If you hear that, then you would be wondering what am I doing in a AA and Faith podcast. And the reason for that is about an year and a half back, a different podcast like this, I was randomly asked the question of what AI would do for Hindu faith 50 to 100 years down the line. And that sort of sparked a thought in me to understand what does humanity look like 50 to 100 years down the line. I was teaching in my day job courses around emerging technologies and its impact on business. And when this question came, faith has been a constant part of my life. And this felt like a natural way by which both of my worlds were trying to converge by itself. And that's when I began to think a bit more about it. I wouldn't consider myself or call myself a theologist or a deep researcher on AI and faith, but know bits of both. And I'm trying to put both of that together in the form of a couple of blogs. And we have some early research trying to understand how the entrepreneurship ecosystem around such intersections of heritage and the modern world are trying to come together.
Incredible. Thank you both for joining us. I have to say, for me, the thing I love most about AI and faith is this incredible diversity of thought leaders and experts from around the world in different faith, in different disciplines, in different subject matters. And I find that for me is the most rewarding part of being here. So thank you both for joining us. Now, we all know that artificial intelligence has been in the news nonstop for the last 3 years, but it feels like the last 3 weeks were even more so compared to the last few years. And there's kind of two big announcements we've all been hearing about and reading about. The first came out of OpenAI when they announced Orchestrator and followed that up by announcement of Deep Research. And these are both exciting new capabilities of AI, really demonstrating or giving us a view into a future where agentic AI, where we have many agents out there that are doing the work on behalf of us, can work more autonomously. This is something a lot of people got very excited about in my world, in the business world, in the startup world, about the way you can use Orchestrator to really automate so many tasks. And like I said, giving us all a picture of the future to come. But of course, the other announcement we heard a lot about was Deepseek out of China. And I wonder, Mark, maybe you can tell us a little bit of what we've heard and what your take on the opportunity is.
My understanding of Deepseek is that it does represent this major development, right, in the direction of this technology, because it again is a very powerful model that really people were surprised by, because the sense was that those kinds of models were coming out of the United States, and as folks are aware, the former administration was trying very hard, right, to sort of cabin that kind of development by controlling the kind of technology that could go abroad in order for, out of a concern that there would be these kinds of developments. But of course, Deepseek shows that, those attempts to control were not as effective as everybody thought. And so it represents several things, at least from my perspective, looking at it from sort of an international law and international relations perspective. One is it just goes to how difficult it can be, right, to control developments in technology for strategic purpose or for any other kind of purpose. And secondly, it also shows that this is kind of a technology is just not going to be able to be kept in a box. Although
Absolutely.
Right, I find it interesting for those reasons, and it will be kind of I think a disruptor, as people know. Now we're seeing kind of how other leaders are sort of responding to this new development. Some saying that's really not that much of a significant change. Others are saying, well, yeah, it really is indicating sort of this major shift in the trajectory.
Sreevas, what have been your takeaway?
And for me, the biggest thing in that is the cost part, right? The fact that it's open source and it's available at what cost it is available at, right? So I think that is going to be a big game changer in the global south, particularly in sort of democratizing access to AI. This could well be the stepping stone to creating some form of AI commons and AI becoming almost like a digital public infrastructure, digital commons infrastructure, which is there as a basic layer, and you can then do advanced stuff on top of it. And that is going to be a big game changer for me in the global south.
If I might add to that, I was just looking at the 2024 AI index, and they were indicating that the private models were tending to be much more powerful, much more accurate, et cetera. But then we see, as to Sreevas's point, because Deepseek comes out of open source, purportedly out of open source, as powerful as it is, it really does seem like a shift, right, towards open source, which, and as Sreevas is pointing out, particularly for developing countries, that's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on what I certainly think is the biggest headline from the DeepSeek news. It's the fact that open source models are becoming incredibly effective. And as you think about it from a business perspective or a faith perspective, the ability for smaller organizations to train models on significantly less money than the flagship models is something that's going to largely democratize, or what I like to use the term commoditize, AI across the world. So it's definitely, I think, one of the main takeaways for me. Now, diving a little bit deeper beyond the news and the headlines, Sreevas, one of the areas that you focus your research on is economics in the rural world and in the global south. And from that perspective, how has the great commoditization of AI impacted rural India? And share a little more about how you think it's going to continue to impact the rural world.
It's had a marked impact. And I would say 3 key areas where it is really beginning to make that impact: health, livelihood improvement, and market access. Let me give you one example each. There's a open source network called CARE, and they started out of COVID. In COVID times, there was no big Gen AI, but this group has stayed on, and now they are innovating with integrating Gen AI. For example, in having an AI assistant for nurses in rural India. And there is now an automated voice to text electronic medical record tool that they have built. These are big time relevant advancements, especially in the rural parts, because one, the languages there are different. So now you have that being democratized with everyone having equal access. Second, these are remote regions. So now with the intersection of AI with some of the critical medical care units, you are now able to really automate looking at parameters, and you just need to get an alert to the hub, bigger hospital, if the parameters are above a particular threshold or whatever. Right? So that's the one big healthcare application, both in terms of assistance as well as improving critical care in rural areas. Second, on livelihood, there's a startup called Karya, and what they do is they are working with rural women and rural youth to create vernacular language voice datasets. So you don't have datasets in vernacular languages of India to be trained on in the first place. Now, how do you create these datasets? You need to create these datasets by employing people to do that. And these people are feeding in data into your likes of OpenAI, into your likes of other big LLM models. And that is helping them get 20 times the minimum Indian wage. So it's a big livelihood improvement in the process of them becoming data creators. And in a way, they also are becoming data owners, because the way they have structured this is the ownership of the data stays with these individuals. So that's a big livelihood improvement example that I'm seeing. Third example on market access is, again, an English language barrier exists with how people can access global markets or access any markets through the smartphone in general. And there we have startups like Sarvam AI working alongside government initiatives called Bhashini. And what that is doing is there are now large language models in multiple Indian vernacular languages. And couple that with open source e-commerce models like ONDC, which is the Open Network for Digital Commerce, which is getting popular across India. That for me is a big game changer when it comes to market access, because now language barrier removed, open access model for market access, and the combination of these two opens up global markets to the rural world, which was not happening at all before. So that's my three insights from rural India. And a quick rounding up thought from a global south in general perspective. There is the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor that came out earlier this week. And one of the key insights that we had from this report is that there is a skew with regard to the awareness of AI within entrepreneurs. And this is unfavorably skewed towards the low and middle income economies, as in the global south entrepreneurs being at an unfavorable disadvantage when it comes to AI awareness. And there, I think that gives you the general picture, right? So we need more of that effort into AI training awareness going into our entrepreneurs in the global south.
Yeah, thank you for adding that last point. I think it's really critical because those of us living certainly in the United States or in Europe hear about AI all day, every day. And it's a really important reminder that not everyone in the world has the same access to information and to insight about this technology. And that is certainly something a lot of us could work on in terms of equality and access and that kind of a thing. So the other thing that came to mind for me while you were talking about was the concept of sustainability. And when I think about sustainability, of course, I think about the planet, but I also think about cultures and economies. I also think about peoples and cultures and the ability to preserve language while increasing socioeconomic income at the same time really feels like an aspirational win-win. So anyways, to me, that was something that was really exciting.
The other thing that comes to mind for me is that Srivas is speaking of, I guess, a phenomenon that is occurring throughout major parts of the developing world. So you see increasing penetration of the technology, say in African countries, in Latin America as well, and of course Srivas has much more information about South Asia. What's interesting, at least from my perspective, is that you see countries from sort of those areas really wanting very much to take advantage and use the benefits of artificial intelligence to actually meet the kinds of life-changing goals that Srivas is describing. And each one of them is also bumping up against sort of challenges sort of related to the ecosystem for this technology, as well as Srivas was mentioning, just awareness, training, those kinds of things. So it feels like we are seeing, and maybe in a sense, the development, right, of a different way in which artificial intelligence is going to be used in those regions. And then it's what will be interesting to see if, as it were, the international structures or organizations that try to steer that are going to be up to the task, coordinating that. That's an open question.
Yeah, and that's a perfect transition to the next topic. But I really wanted to say that I loved what you added there, which is, again, we are imagining the use cases that matter for us as people who work often in white collar jobs and live in wealthy societies. But of course, the key use cases people other parts of the world will use will be different. And thus the governance and the safety will have to be different as well. And I think that's a really important nuanced point that we don't always make. So, one of the things that Mark and I share an interest in is both AI's impact on foreign policy and AI governance. And Mark, I'm curious, what are you paying attention to in the world of AI governance and in the way that AI is really impacting a lot of foreign policy and governance around the world?
You had mentioned, say, the past 3 years, maybe the past 3 weeks as being just seminal, right, for this area. I think because of the release of large language models and other forms of generative AI, really AI has come to the fore in the public attention, certainly has come to the attention of governments. So you see more and more at the regional level and at the individual nation state level, more and more releases of national strategies and ways to try to steer the uses of the technology within their countries, within their given their particular needs, background, et cetera. You also see that happening at the international level within the United Nations and its sister organizations. It's also, with all the agencies and bodies within the United Nations system, OECD, et cetera. And then, of course, given the recent changes to the US administration, you just see then this challenge as to an open question as to whether all of that, so much more, of course, is being called into question. We're seeing these developments which really do raise the issue as to how much progress really is going to be made in the kinds of international cooperation that will be needed given the change in administration.
Yeah, the question that I get a lot when I speak with CEOs is, do we have the right institutions in society, in government, in the world to regulate AI? My immediate bias is to say no, but I'm curious, Mark, what's your perspective?
To the extent I agree with you, and I do, it is because the uses and the ways in which AI and their applications are unfolding, right, or it's almost impossible for any kind of regulatory structure to keep track.
Yeah.
But I'm quick to say that, AI is not developing in a vacuum, right? There's already existing law which purports to touch all of these various domains: transportation, safety, health, education, etc. And so, those are always there and do reach, or at least attempt to reach, some of these new developments. And of course, though, as you're alluding to, it creates gaps in any of the structures, whether they are like formal institutions or formal laws or informal statements, policies, etc. So I think we're all going to be, and continue to be, we'll be bumping up against those gaps, right? And so we're going to have to respond in that way. Hopefully, though, it won't be like major catastrophic events that we're gonna have to face up with, or that's going to wake us up to that need.
During the writer's strike a couple years ago in Los Angeles, I was giving a number of talks about AI in the region. And of course, the first question I got from the audience every time was about the writer's strike. And I often talk about this really difficult balancing act of looking at human creators versus AI creators. And I always say every human author has read thousands of books and been inspired by those books. Every human painter has looked at thousands of pictures and been inspired by those pictures or paintings. And we feel no problem with them being inspired and creating their own, what we would call original works of art. But AI, we often have different instincts. And I wonder, what's your instincts to both of you in terms of kind of this copyright question, in terms of, is AI really able to create original things today? Or are these really purely derivatives that should be copywritten, or some sort of ownership should be given to the original creator? I wonder if either of you have a take on that.
That is a question I'm still wrestling with, to be honest with you.
Me too.
And in a sense, that's where AI and faith, come into play, because I think we start to begin to ask questions of what does it mean to be a human being. As you are well aware, in many religious traditions, our ability to create and be creative is one of the ways in which we distinguish ourselves as human beings vis-a-vis other animals, etc. So when we talk about whether whether AI can create, we are bumping up against that. I agree completely with you that I think if we were to look at, if we could really trace the process by which we as human beings come up with quote unquote original works, et cetera, it's exactly as you describe it. You sort of soak it all up, and then you come up and respond to out of that experience. And who's to say that the algorithm isn't doing anything different than that? But I don't know about you, but it feels different in a fair real way. But I can't articulate that. And if you look at process, it's not clear all the time to me what distinguishes them.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same position. That's the same thing I said to the audiences in Los Angeles. Sreevas, anything to add?
I just think about like the AI policy intersection in terms of how Asim Azar, for instance, put it across in his book, right? Which is, you have these linear institutions, which is how our traditional formal institutions, be it intellectual property, be it copyright law, whatever, all of them have kind of had this linear trajectory in how they have all gone. And now we are kind of working with technologies that are exponential. So there is that one curve going this way and the other curve, which is like linear this way. And then you have this big gap between this curve and the other curve. And that gap is very, very hard to catch up just overnight. I mean, like if you hear what the Paris AI Summit said or the Munich Security Conference said, it's all like, it's a big catch up that is happening. And it's not a catch up that we can really catch up at the pace that the technology will go. So I think we are sort of at this stage where we just have to say we have no idea. I mean, I think we just have to be frank and humble about the fact that it's just sort of Wild West almost. Yeah.
That raises, you often hear that technology is outpacing the law. We hear this in law all the time, and Sreevas is quite right. In many ways, that is completely true. One of my colleagues, Ryan Kahlo from the University of Washington, he always raises, well, when the automobile came out, yes, there were changes in law, but at the same time, there was existing law that eventually was able to result in, as it were, meaningful control over that industry, over the use of the automobile. And his implication is that eventually we will be able to find ways to work that out. But that's quite right to say that I think it'll take time before we use these existing constructs like intellectual property to try to answer the questions that we're asking ourselves today.
Yeah, and it seems to me just like we do at AI and Faith, we want these conversations had with diverse perspective and life experiences, really, because AI is going to change our world, and we want to all be included in these conversations, which I think why it's so important for all of us and all the others engaging with both AI and faith, but other organizations really thinking about the future of AI. Now, one more question in this realm, Mark, before we move on. In my world, in kind of startup and VC land, people talk a lot about regulating technology versus regulating use cases of the technology. And I wonder if you have a perspective on if the one of those superior, do we need to have a mix of the two? How do you think about that?
It's a mix. And it's not an issue about either or, because obviously, again, going back to the idea that there is pre-existing law that touches on each one of these domains. And we know, of course, that the versatility of the technology, it's going to just be appearing, and it already is in every area. So anyway, that means that goes to use. And so that there will be, and there should be regulations that talk about the impacts and the way in which it's used. That said, I don't want to rule out the ability to talk or regulate certain aspects of the technology, maybe not so much the technology per se, but certainly, for example, the development process, or requiring, say, stakeholder participation in the development of the technologies. I think, and encouraging the use of technological tools to evaluate things like bias, content moderation, those kinds of things, because obviously that research is ongoing, and we ought to continue to explore it. So it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, changing subject just a little bit, Sreevas, one of the things you study is the cultural divide that we see in different parts of the world. And I'm curious, both with an optimistic lens and maybe a pessimistic lens, how you think AI will impact the cultural divide we see on the planet.
They give you the optimistic take to start with. We can hear the pessimistic note more often. So let me flip the coin over there.
I love it.
The way I would think about this is from the core construct of Hindu faith called Purushartha. And this talks about 4 aspects or 4 aims of life, which is Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Dharma as in righteousness, Artha as in wealth, Kama as in pleasure, and Moksha is about self-realization and liberation, all of that. And the way I think about the intersection of this with AI is AI algorithms and large language models, they need to be trained on data which is morally sound. So that's the Dharma component. So the right data needs to be fed into what is getting trained. That's point 1. Point 2 is, with AI becoming almost a co-pilot and increasingly becoming co-augmenter of whatever we do, I expect it will naturally propel humanity towards economic prosperity, because we are entering into the era of technological abundance and multiple technological convergences. That would require subsequently some form of universal basic income type elements to come in to bridge the inequality gaps, or the fact that you don't need as many humans to be working in regular day job type settings. And when human mind gets liberated out of the day job settings, which is a positive thing in some sense also, because if you really think about it, not every one of us really want a 9-to-5 job to be what we really want to do, right? So the fact that we are liberating some of that time might actually be good. And in the first instance, this is going to be utilized in more of your creative thought, utilized in potentially more pleasure activities, which is what I will categorize as karma components. Beyond the point, you then start to go back to what Mark was saying earlier, which is start questioning about, like, what does it mean to be a human being? What does life mean? All of those fundamental questions start coming in. And then you start integrating with the moksha component, which is about a resurgence in interest around spirituality and faith-related pursuits. So I think the optimistic take for me is, if we go down this trajectory, I see better evolution of human as a construct happening, with AI augmenting a lot of what we do. That's my hypothesis.
I like it. I always say that in the best of us, I imagine AI can lead to a new enlightenment, a new renaissance, where we become philosophers and poets and artists again because of the economic productivity increases that happen. And of course, I echo some of the concerns, I think, embedded in your statement around the potential uneven distribution of this new productivity around the world. Mark, anything to add to the thoughts around bridging culture and the way AI might change kind of global culture?
I think, as Sreevas is saying, it will have, it's both positive and negative effects, because it'll enable things like the preservation of language and allow for, as it were, these kind of nuanced, localized of the technology, and thereby strengthening those cultures, those localities. But then, there's always, and it's always going to be this tension, right? There'll be this centripetal forces as well, because it's just the way the technology works. And people, have expressed concerns, for example, of the datafication of the individual, all of those kinds of things. By definition, the uses of these technologies at local levels is going to raise those same kinds of issues. And so we might find ourselves, right, faced with, as it were, the same kinds of challenges, same and a reshaping of how we understand ourselves as human beings, even though it's happening in various parts of the world. So that's one of my takes on it. But, just a purely, I don't think I would call it superficial, but just another layer. I'm traveling back and forth to Japan a little bit more often than I used to. I find it just enormously helpful to have the technology help me navigate in different cultures. And so, as it were, to bridge gaps that used to be almost insurmountable without a lot of effort, right, to be able to do that. So that's a smaller
Absolutely.
example.
I think that's a very important one, though. I always think about the new use cases with AI that almost brought about the universal translator from Star Trek. The little thing that they all had on their lapel. And it's amazing to imagine, having a conversation with someone with different language and just removing that barrier. For me, that's incredibly aspirational to think about a future where these language barriers stop dividing us, which, is one of the challenges. There's one more topic I want to touch on with both of you, of course, which is the impact of AI on spirituality and faith. And we'll start with you, Mark, and then we'll go to Sreevas. And maybe, Sreevas, you can share a little bit about the metaverse perspective you have as well. How do you think about AI impacting the realm of faith and spirituality? And does that excite you, or is that more of a less exciting?
That's a good question. I come out of a Christian background, and the way I tend to think of it is, so in what ways will artificial intelligence, say, for example, enable us to build communities where people thrive, et cetera, because that is certainly part of the tradition from which and so to the extent that AI technologies are going to allow us to, both to Sreevas's earlier points, live better lives, be better connected, to experience things that we would call healing from those kinds of things. I think my tradition would want very much to support those developments. But again, because of the possible negative effects, if we ever see the uses or deployment of AI that work against the community, that are harmful, then clearly my tradition would call us, right? Our tradition would call us to put that to the side, right? We would resist those kinds of developments. So that's one aspect. In terms of as it were, notions of spirituality, again, very similar to our conversation about creativity, I'm still pondering that, to be honest with you. For example, I was with a friend once who was beta testing a large language model, and we were asking it, quote unquote, spiritual questions for, like, please give us, an inspirational message for the day out of our faith tradition, essentially. It gave us the passage of scripture, gave us a few thoughts, and we asked ourselves, could we ignore the fact that it was an AI, it was an LLM that was doing this for us? Or, was something wrong with that picture? And I think for myself, I haven't yet decided.
Yeah.
In fact, there is a recent instance when a friend of mine was telling me that he was doing sort of regular meditation stuff, and he was unsure about some sort of experience that he had. And then he apparently just put down those experience in an LLM model to understand what does it mean. And apparently he said he got a pretty good answer back from the LLM saying this experience is linked to this tradition of Buddhist philosophy. It means this, so, and all of that. Like, just as Mark was saying, that's like we assume the LLM doesn't really know, but then it probably knows a lot more about some of these philosophies deeply than we actually think it does. Yeah.
And please maybe share a little bit more about your thinking and how it connects to the potential metaverse.
So I think, like, for me, the super exciting part is the intersection between AI and metaverse. The way I am seeing this play out is a multi-step model, which is the first step of this is you are going to see the younger generation of today engage with faith out of their couches, as in they would be playing games, which would, if we kind of think about it from a Hindu philosophy standpoint, it might be like dancing with Krishna in Vrindavan, or being a Vanara, which is the monkey group that helped Rama in Ramayana. So as kids, you might well be doing that out of your couch as your first step, engaging in games around philosophical stories or mythological stories. Second would be the advanced stage of this, which is you're role playing this in some way. And there, I think the AI would come in. So you would have AI models which are, let's say, trained on the Bhagavad Gita, and you will have a virtual avatar of Krishna. And the kids of today, beyond the initial couch jumping stage, would start talking to Krishna and having this sort of conversation around what does Bhagavad Gita mean for life or whatever. And there I'm also seeing there are workshops that some of the startups in India are doing around future visualizations. And the way they are using it is using AI and cultural heritage to get youth in colleges to think about a future that is embedded in cultural heritage aspects. We kind of see this intersection of image building, future creation, and AI coming together there. The third step of this would be more deeper heritage space immersions. And there you will see the startups which are, let's say, building heritage spaces around churches or heritage spaces around temples or heritage spaces around historical learning sites. And you would have the people who are like the kids from couch playing to the role playing with Krishna coming into this stage, and then they are engaging in historical heritage spaces. And some of them might also be engaging with meditative spaces, which might be like a Himalayan meditative setting. And with what Neuralink can do, I don't want an implant in my head, but if I can get the right stimulation of the brain, accompanied by the virtual immersion that the heritage space can give me, then I have a game changer killer application for my deep meditative experience there. So that would be my third stage in the process. And the final stage would be people then asking these deeper spiritual engagement questions and finding answers for it. So I see this intersection playing in a very interesting way. It's already playing. I'm not even saying this is the future. I'm seeing parts of this individually playing. It's just that we will see this all coming together in the near future. So that's my view of metaverse intersection with AI.
That's very exciting. And I will say I have a Muslim friend of mine who shared a very similar vision about the pilgrimage to Mecca and the idea that whether it's physically, financially, for other reasons, most Muslims can't afford to go to Mecca on a regular basis for the pilgrimage, but still want to participate in the spiritual and religious practice of the pilgrimage. And they thought very similarly about the metaverse and even about some of those things that combine real space like with the metaverse, like there's people who are physically there who are really helping you give the experience. I would just add from a Jewish perspective, I think a lot about the way that AI can be used. People refer to Jews as the people of the book. And the thing about if you study Judaism, right? Judaism is a 2,500-year debate. Before that, we had priests and slightly a different version of Judaism. But if we look at Judaism since the time of the temples, we essentially became the people of the book, and Judaism was a debate. I tell people when you read the Talmud, which is the great book of Jewish law, what you read in it reads a little bit like if you read like the Supreme Court record. There is the debate and there's the side that won the debate, but it's not that you get to erase the losing side's perspective from the historical debate. So I imagine using AI being able to bring these texts for life to go beyond language barrier. Obviously, like a lot of it's written in Aramaic languages that no one speaks anymore. So I see a lot of opportunities from a Jewish perspective to bring AI and to deepen your connection to the faith.
Absolutely. Same happening with Sanskrit as a language barrier, right? So a lot of these texts are in Sanskrit language, and there are startups which are doing LLMs out of Sanskrit language Vedas. Just like your magisterium AI giving what for the Catholic Church, you have a startup called Moksha, and they have an Acharya called Arya, and that's the Acharya that's trained on the Vedas. So you can ask it any question, and it will give you a Vedas linked answer to it. So yeah.
I love that. I love that.
I was going to say that I think this is really fascinating, right? That these uses are already in place. People are going exploring these things. So the thing that comes to mind for me, and I asked this of myself as well as I'm using this technology, is what might be some, I don't even know if this is the correct terminology, criteria or what, how would we gauge that this kind of experience that we're having with the technology is, I don't know, deepening our faith as we're making us better adherents of our faith. I'm just, asking that of myself because that's going to be a question I think we'll be asking ourselves in the future. Because I think these uses are unavoidable and maybe we shouldn't try to avoid them.
Yeah, no, I think the question you're asking is a really important, broad question. I often use the analogy of a calculator versus essay writing. And I always say, if you were to walk to your accountant's office and there wasn't a calculator on their desk, you better turn around and walk out. But so I'm all for giving students access to calculators. But essay writing, just like arithmetic, actually develops something in the mind that I think is much deeper than just the skill of doing it. And thinking about how GPT is different from a basic calculator they might use in an accounting course is the same, I think, point you're making, and a difficult question we're all going to have to answer. Now, I know we could have gone on for at least another hour. This has been an incredible conversation. But before I let you guys go, we do have a quick lightning round. So you're each going to have 15 seconds to give a very quick answer. And we're going to start with you, Mark, and then we'll go to Sreevas. So the first question, Mark, what is one of your favorite use cases for Gen AI?
Music composition.
I love that. What about you, Sreevas?
As a visualization tool for reimagining the past and the future.
I love that. Okay, you're going to go first this time, Sreevas. What are not enough people talking about in the world of artificial intelligence?
AI commons. So this is going to be different from the big tech led AI, and it's sort of going to be different from a government led AI. This sort of third alternative of AI commons.
And Mark?
It's the depth of use of Gen AI among children.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the last question, Mark, you can kick us off. Would you want access to an AI priest or guru?
I would like to engage in a conversation with that guru.
What about you, Sreevas?
I'm just kind of revisiting the example that I said earlier. Yes, to the extent that when I have these sort of queries, questions, it kind of helps with that initial building block. So I would say you will see a future starting with a real guru and then going to a real guru.
My answer would also be yes. I would love to get to know and to debate Maimonides or one of the ancient rabbis. Well, thank you both. This was an incredible conversation about really important topics. I'm so grateful for you guys joining us. And of course, to all of our listeners, thank you for engaging and thank you for staying engaged with this important topic.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Stay tuned to listen to more recordings and interviews with experts from around the world. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on our social media as well. We're on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.